this is Shannon. Welcome back to my channel where you will find all things art. Today I am painting a Rose-breasted Grosbeak over an out-of-focus background on an 8-inch round canvas. I have a separate video for this out-of-focus background. I will put a link below for the video on how to do that with an airbrush. But you can always use whatever background you like. Just make sure it's all done and dry before you start with the bird. I have used tracing and white transfer paper to put this image on the canvas. I got the image of this bird from Pixabay, and the link for that will be in the description. Pixabay is a royalty-free site where you can find thousands of royalty-free images you can use for your references. I use this site all the time. It's my favorite. You can trace this image or freehand it on another piece of paper. If you are freehanding, I do recommend doing it on another piece of paper and still transferring it over. Because it will minimize erase marks or lines that may show through your work. I use Liquitex Basics paint as I find it works best for the way that I work in acrylics. It is more on the affordable side, which is great for beginners, and it's also archival. So I mixed Unbleached Titanium White and Mars Black to paint the bark on the tree. I do thin my paint down with a bit of water just to about the consistency of ink so that it goes on the canvas smoothly. I'm just aiming to fill in most of the tree branch with like a mid-tone gray. I'm using a one-liner brush to do most of the work on this one. My goal is to highlight a bit more on the top of the branch with a slightly lighter gray and a darker gray towards the bottom of the branch to give it some shape. To make the lighter gray, you would mix with more of the Unbleached Titanium White, and for the darker gray, you would mix more with the Mars Black. This is just a base layer that we can build from, so no need to worry about perfection. Close is good, and we'll be layering on top of it anyway. The best part about acrylics is that you can just keep building it up until it looks good. Once I get a solid base layer on the tree branch, I'm going to start adding texture to it. I'm going to be adding lighter lines in a half circle shape at the top and darker lines in a half circle shape at the bottom. This will add texture as well as define the shape of the branch better. The lighting in this reference photo isn't super amazing, so I amped up the contrast a bit and played with the lighting a bit. Although I usually use a reference photo, I rarely follow the reference photo 100%. I use the reference photo more as a guide to help with some level of realism, but I'm always trying to improve or put my own personal spin on each piece. I'm going to shadow a bit more underneath this bird as the light source is from the top left. So the bird would be blocking some of the light, so it would be a little bit darker underneath that bird. And if you're doing a painting and you make a mistake or you get a line where you don't want to, it is so easy to just wipe it away with a wet paintbrush. It works essentially as an eraser. If you take a paintbrush and get it wet, wipe it away just like that, erases the problem. And so long as you're using quality paints, the wet paint will wipe away and the dry paint will stay intact. Some lesser quality paints won't work quite this way, so you want to make sure that you're using quality paints if you want to work in this layering process and to be able to use the wet brush as an eraser like that. I'm just going to keep adding the lines until I get the texture and contrast to a level I like. I'm also going to add a few knots into the tree branch. I'm just going to do a little small dot of black with a highlight around the circle, a highlighted circle around the top, and it'll give that look of the knot in the tree branch. The colors that I'm using are not super important. The contrast is far more important. I keep mentioning getting your lights light enough and your darks dark enough because it's the most important part of art. Differences in lighting can change the color of the subject greatly, but if the darks aren't dark enough and the lights aren't light enough, it's not going to look right. Those values are really what makes a painting look three-dimensional. I'm going to continue to go back and forth with the lighting and texture as I go. I'm going to continue to go lighter on the top and darker on the bottom and continue to amp up that contrast until I like it. I'm also going to build up the shadow under those feet. We want the feet to stand out from the branch and create a bit of a shadow so it looks like the feet are in front of the tree branch. Once we get the tree branch about to the way we want it, we're going to start on the bird legs. I'm using the same Unbleached Titanium White and Mars Black with just a hint of yellow ochre to give it a slightly different tone. Watch your values here. Again, make sure your shadows are dark enough and your highlights are light enough. If you don't, those feet won't look right. They won't look like they're on the branch the way you want them to. The legs have little lines and wrinkles where the toes bend. Again, I'm not following the reference photo 100%. I'm giving the general idea of the texture of the legs and not aiming for a perfect copy. It's not necessary to get every single line exactly as the reference photo. Just so the texture looks similar, it's going to look good. I do tend to lean more towards high contrast preferences, so I will frequently go back and amp up the contrast more in different areas as I'm working on a piece. In acrylics, I generally aim to work from the back of a piece to the front of the piece. That's why I did the background first, then the branch, then the feet, then finally the bird. As you see here, I keep going back to the tree branch. After looking at it with fresh eyes, I felt it needed more contrast, more amping up. I do this a lot. Sometimes when you look at a piece for too long, you start to go a bit cross-eyed or just start missing things or thinking things are good before they truly are. Taking breaks as needed, like going for a walk, going to get a drink, come back with fresh eyes, and more times than not, you will notice differences or things that you missed or things that you want to do more on. I will also frequently step back from the work, like take a picture or look at it from farther away. At times we get so focused on one area that we don't know how it looks with the rest of the piece. I've heard some artists working on a small area until they get it perfect before moving on to another section. I work to get things so they look pretty good, but I will continue to go back and forth and work on previous areas as I come back with fresh eyes, or when I look at pictures and decide it needs a bit more in one place or another, it needs a bit more amping up in contrast or whatever. So I tend to go a bit more back and forth as I work on a piece. I judge my values as I work on a piece. I'll change my values on previous, so I just kind of go back and forth. For the bird's head, I'm going to be using a rake brush to create the texture of the feathers. A rake brush is a bit like the fork version of a brush. There are little gaps between the bristles at the tips of the brush, and when used correctly, it has the effect of several very small liner brushes all at once. This brush may take some practice, but I use it almost every time I do a piece. You have to water it down to just the right consistency and make sure you don't have too much on the brush to use it correctly. And there is no exact formula for me to tell you how to use it, so you'll have to get a feel for it. I recommend practicing on a piece of paper. That way you can get a feel for it before you go on your final piece. I'm still using the Unbleached Titanium White and the Mars Black for the head. I'm just using very little titanium white, so it's more like a very dark gray. You never want to jump straight to your brightest lights or your darkest darks. This gives you nowhere to go to amp up the contrast. So save your lightest whites and blackest blacks for the very last touches, so that you have the contrast where you need it to be. I'm just doing a base layer on the head as I want to do the beak and the eye before I complete the head. I do use a titanium white for the highlight on the head, but I will tone this down as I go, so it won't be so obnoxiously bright when I'm done. The eye is so small that some might be intimidated by it, but it really is easy. So it's just a small black dot in the center with a dark gray around that, and then there's like a dot of titanium white on the top to highlight. Because this is not a super large piece, you really don't need more detail than that. And bird eyes really don't have a lot of detail to them. We are going to add some detail to the outside of the eye, but not a whole lot. When we switch over to the red breast area, we're going to need to fill it in with white first, and we're going to have to make sure that that is completely dry. Red is very translucent, and if we put it on top of the white, it will make it brighter. But you don't want the two colors to mix together, as white and red will make pink no matter what way you swing it. So you want to make sure that that white is completely dry before you go back on top of it with the red. We do not want that to mix together, although a pink-breasted grosbeak could look pretty cool. For the beak, I'm going to use Unbleached Titanium White and Yellow Ochre. I used Ivory Black for the black on the beak, all but the very tip. I used Mars Black. So the line around the beak, the shadow underneath, and the shading around the beak is all Ivory Black, which is more translucent. I can't talk. It's more translucent and gives a nice shadow effect. If you take a clean, damp brush, you will be able to manipulate the paint around to create that shadowed look. It will take some practice to perfect this technique. If you have too much water on the brush, it will just erase the paint like we did earlier. So you want to find the right balance. I recommend dabbing the brush on a paper towel to minimize how wet it is. Eventually you'll get a feel for about what is right and what you need in order to utilize it this way. Nothing is a substitute for doing and learning the feel of a medium and how to do the art. You can watch all the tutorials or read all the books, but nothing will help you advance more in art than actually creating. Learn the medium, how to work with it, and more importantly, how to fix mistakes. No one's perfect, and mistakes are always going to be made. The fastest way to learn is jump in head first, make a bunch of mistakes early, and learn how to fix them. A lot of people will get discouraged with a piece and they will throw it away. Don't. I encourage you to finish the piece. Find a way to fix and finish the piece. You will learn far more than than you will from anything else. With a liner brush, I'm going to start to define the feathers on the head better. A rake brush is great for a quick base, but you do not want to only use it as it tends to make everything just a bit more uniform. I use a liner to break this up a bit and make it look more natural and to give just a bit more shadow around the beak. With feathers or even fur on any animal, you always want to watch the direction of the feathers or fur. Even though I don't follow the reference photo 100%, I still have to make sure the feathers are going in the same direction as the photo or it's just not going to look right. In this piece, I'm frequently looking at the photo of this bird to ensure that I'm following the directions correctly. I'm just going to continue to build up the texture of that fur and the values of the fur until I cover the head and it begins to look right. Once I get the head about where I want it, I'm going to fill in the red in the top of fill in the red on top of the white. The white must be completely dry unless you're going for that surreal pink-breasted grosbeak look we talked about earlier. If someone does do the pink-breasted grosbeak, I want to see it. It sounds cool. I'm once again using the rake brush to fill this in. Don't forget to watch your reference photo and the direction of the feathers. If you rotate the rake brush as you do each stroke, it will minimize how uniform those feathers look. And make sure you overlap those feathers. Otherwise, you'll just have lines everywhere and it just won't look right. You're going to want to overlap them and create clumps and clusters of the feathers. I'm going to build up color for this in layers to make the red show up brighter and really pop and give it more depth. I'm going to let it dry and go on with another layer to increase the color saturation for the red on that portion. I'm going to use Unbleached Titanium White for the main part of the body. In most cases, like white feathers and fur are not actually all white. There will be other colors mixed in that is reflecting from surrounding things. It's never all white. If you have trouble with color identification, you can use Photoshop or something like that to identify the different colors in a photo. I usually use Procreate for this, but it is only available on the Apple Store. I'm using some Ivory Black and Titanium White for the bottom of that bird to create the shadow for its lower body. I will just keep building up those feathers until they look right. I'm going to continue to darken the lower body shadow with a cool tone until it feel like it's dark enough to create that shadow. Then I'm going to overlap from the warmer color down over to the darker area to ease the transition from light to shadow. I'm going to make each base layer a bit darker than I want the end result to be. When I highlight over it, it's going to make it appear lighter. The way I work is in a lot of shadows. A lot of times artists will just get paint on and they'll be afraid to mess it up, and they just get to a point where they're afraid to add anything to it, so the piece will never improve because they're afraid to keep adding. With acrylics especially, never be afraid to continue working on a piece. If you get to a place where you don't like, just paint over it. Keep adding to it until you like it. You know, don't get to a point where you think it's okay, but you're worried about wrecking it. So even though you think that you could add or refine it, you're afraid to. Just do it. You can always go over it if you don't like it until you get to a point where you do like it. never run out of layers with acrylic, so just keep adding until you like how it looks. And now I'm going to add the little tail peeking out from the back of the bird. Nothing special here, we're just going to use Mars Black to create the shape of the tail. I'm going to continue to layer and add highlights to the bird using the rake brush. I'm going to be adding titanium white to the unbleached titanium to make it stand out brighter from the other feathers we already have in place. And I'm going to continue to keep rotating the brush to create different strokes so that we don't have too uniform of feathers, as that doesn't look natural. On the red breast portion, I'm going to add another layer of red and then let it completely dry before going on with another layer of highlights. For the highlights on this, I'm just using titanium white. It doesn't matter that this is such an intense highlight. We are going to glaze over it, which will tone it down. But it will also create more depth in the feathers, as it will be just a bit brighter than the other feathers that were already red. Be sure that you let each layer dry completely before going over it with the next, so that you don't end up mixing the red and white together to get pink. You can continue to layer this up as much as you would like till you reach the depth and saturation that you're going for. Make each piece your own. I know when I first started, I was following tutorials as closely as possible. Every color they used, I tried to do how they did it. I tried to use what brush they used. But a lot of creating your own style is what you enjoy, adding your own touches. Whatever your personal preferences creates your artistic style. Favoring a certain color over another, the way you choose to highlight. It's just, don't be afraid to change certain aspects of a painting to be more your style or what you would like. One of the greatest things about being an artist is that you can create whatever way you want to, and don't ever let others tell you how to create. Do what you enjoy. I'm going to do some final touch-ups on the head with the rake brush, and I'm using Ivory Black, which is more translucent so that you can see through, giving more depth to the layers below. I'm just glazing a bit of that Ivory Black over some of that intense highlight on the head to tone it down a bit. This is very watered down. I just want to tone it down a bit. I don't want to get rid of it. That about wraps this one up. I'm just going to add my signature to the bottom. I hope this was helpful. If it was, please give it a like. And if you'd like to see more art videos, please subscribe so you don't miss out on any new videos. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.